uh, see.
We'll just wait a few more minutes here to get going. See, people are rapidly entering the meeting chat. We'll talk about this a little more today, but we have two new members of the board, one familiar face, there's Ken, and one brand new face, Stephen Bedrick. Right. Excellent. Welcome.
Sorry, I'm experiencing an echo when you talk.
Laura, have you called in with a phone as well as your computer?
No, it's right in.
That was my one easy possible solution.
Just to call in.
Well, you know, if you had a phone going at the same time, that often causes an echo. We can see and hear you okay on our end.
Okay, it just went away. Nope, it didn't. You did. Yours did. Mine did.
With your own voice, when you speak, you hear that feedback?
Yes.
Tom, any ideas? Cecilia, Mark, any ideas? I don't know what to do there.
Just remind everybody to turn off their mics so we don't have a bunch of open mics. That'll create part of the problem.
Yeah, sometimes using a headset will fix that issue as well.
Yeah, I could do that.
We have our youngest member of the OHCB, Merlin Burray. Welcome. See, Jeff Wyatt. Mark, is Jeff Wyatt on the line? Are you working with him? I don't see Jeff. Morning, Sarah.
Yeah, I had all kinds of problems getting in. I even tried 10 minutes early, and it took me this long to get in.
Right. Jeff White, good morning. Is there a chair?
Hey, good morning. Wrestling with Microsoft Teams this morning. Doesn't seem to play well with Apple's products.
You're not the only one having a few challenges this morning getting in, but we can see and hear you okay.
Good.
And we have many other people kind of filtering into our meeting here.
Hey, Max, this is Tom Roberts.
Hi, Tom.
So you dropped off earlier when I just told everybody I want to make sure you could hear me okay, but I'm going to be traveling today while I'm attending the meeting, so I'll be voice only.
Well, thanks for making the time as you can for the meeting. Appreciate it. Yeah, that's great. We can hear you just fine, by the way. That was
Perfect.
awesome.
Thank you.
This is Rip Williams. I'm also only by phone until about 10:45, and then I'll join via camera.
Okay. Again, loud and clear. And thanks for making the time that you do have to join us. Much appreciated.
Thanks.
So are we ready to get started, Max?
Let me ask Mark Reese. Mark, are you working with anybody right now to get in? We're at 8:05.
Go ahead. Go right ahead. We're good to go.
Okay.
Okay, let's go ahead and call the meeting to order and welcome everyone. A reminder to mute your microphones when you're not talking. Use the raise hand feature, and Mark and Max and I'll try to deal with those as they come up. So the next item on the list is introductions or roll call, I guess, right, Max? Mark, roll call.
Yes. Yeah.
So if we can go through here, Susan Katz, Mary
I don't
Lou.
see her on my list.
Yeah, Mary Lou,
Here.
Laura Feldman, I see her on the list. Okay.
Here.
Erica, how about Justin?
Yep, I'm present, thanks.
Okay, Tom Roberts,
Here and present.
Jim,
Jim Doherty. Yes, good morning. I'll meet you guys on the office computer in a little bit.
okay, great. Aaron, and by the way, sorry, I'm not great with all the last names yet. There's quite a few of them. So Aaron, are you with us? How about Dan Solitz? Brian?
Here.
Senator Gorsuch?
Good morning. I am here.
Great. Senator Hansel? Representative Levy?
Here.
Representative Sanchez?
Present and accounted for.
Great. Representative Williams?
Here.
Okay, thank you. That's the board. Mark, I assume we have a quorum.
Yes, you do.
Great. So there've been some other prospective board members that have been invited. So if you would like to introduce yourselves, that would be great. Maybe start with Stephen Bedrick, if you're here.
I am. Hi there. Nice to meet everyone. Thanks so much for inviting me to join. I actually have my paperwork for my oath of office and everything here ready to go in the mail, so almost done.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
And yeah.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Ken Niles.
Hi, good morning. I know a lot of you already. Just for those who I don't know, I spent 32 years working for the Oregon Department of Energy on Hanford issues until I retired about 1.5 years ago. And of your Odo staff, I hired Sarah and Jeff and Tom and Mark. So
Wow.
know all them well as well as Max. So good to be back engaged.
Great. Good work. Dirk Dunning. How about Maya Burke?
Hello,
my name is Mia Burke. I work for Hanford Challenge. I started with them in October of 2021, and I'm just happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Okay. John Schaefer from Umatilla County. Okay, is there anyone else that would like to introduce themselves? Okay, we can proceed with the minutes from the last meeting. Are there any comments, please? Laura, I believe you had a comment.
Yes, I noticed in the minutes that the motion to begin our meetings with a land acknowledgement was not included.
So we would amend the meetings to include that issue and the fact that it was pushed forward to this meeting. So we'll address it in board business after lunch, if that's okay.
Thank you.
Okay, any other changes or modifications to the minutes? If not, I would entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
Brian Wolf here. I so move.
Is there a second?
I second.
Okay, without objection, then the minutes are approved. Okay, so we can move on to the next item on the agenda. And Max, would you like to do introductions here, or Mark?
Yeah, sounds great. Thank you, Jeff. So first up this morning is a presentation / discussion from our colleagues at U.S. Department of Energy, Hanford office, Richland office. The spirit of today's presentation is more focused on Richland operations as opposed to ORP or tanks, which is what we did last time. And of course, there's plenty of crossover between. It's not such a clear-cut distinction, but we're glad to have our colleagues from DOE. There was some last-minute changes, so I can't remember exactly who is presenting today from DOE. But we're trying to do, like we did in January, more of an open discussion with more just dialogue, plenty of Q&A from the board to ask questions as they say fit, and sort of try and make it more light on the PowerPoint presentations and more discussion points. But really, that's sort of our idea here in our spirit. Jolene Garcia, I see you from DOE smiling there. Hello. Thanks for coming. I apologize. I don't know exactly who is presenting from your side.
That's okay. Thank you. My name's Jolene Garcia. I'm with the Hanford Office of Communications. Really proud to be here today. And I'd like to introduce our team. You know, we have, we're going to talk about, as was discussed, we're going to talk about the Richland operations side of the house. I'm starting to see people showing their screens. Kelly Ebert is going to, from our capital projects team, is going to, and Richland Operations Office, Project and Facilities Division. She will be talking about the K-East Reactor Interim Safe Storage ISS project. We will then have Naomi Jasky, Supervisor, Physical Scientists, Richland Operations, Soil and Groundwater Division. And then we will be talking about the groundwater. And then we will have Gary Piles, Federal Project Director, Richland Operations Projects and Facility Division. And he will walk us through the updates and capsule dry storage project. So I am, and I hope that I see everybody online. So we have our team here. Really looking forward to the updates, and thank you all very much for having us here. I'm here as we have Gary Younger on the line. He's our federal coordinator for the Oregon Hanford cleanup board here at DOE, but he had been off last week, so they had me step in for him so he could have a little bit of time off. I'm sharing my screen for the first time. I do have some technical person beside me, so if you see me like going over here, help. That's what I'm doing. So thank you everybody in advance for patience. I will get us started and share our screen. Share my screen with the presentation.
Thank you, Jolynn. Much appreciated. Welcome, Dewey. Just as a point for all the folks on our board who may not know, just a very basic. The Hanford site, from the U.S. DOE perspective, is split into two major divisions: what we call or what they call the Richland Operations Office and the Office of River Protection, the ORP. I said ORP as an acronym. I apologize. I'll try to use fewer acronyms, but two distinct divisions that roll up into the one Hanford site here. So, all right. Thank you, DOE folks. Please take it away.
Okay. Can everybody see the screen?
Yes, Jolynn.
All right, thanks so much. So Kelly, this was the purpose of the briefing, and Kelly, just let me know when you'd like me to change slides.
Okay, go ahead to the next slide. All right, as Jolynn mentioned, my name is Kelly Ebert, and today I will be giving you an update on the K-East interim safe storage. So first off, I just want to start off and talk about the purpose of this particular project. This right here, you can see a picture of what's called the safe storage enclosure. This will protect the reactor building. This is installed after the fuel basin was removed. So that was removed several years ago over at K-East Reactor. And so they've done all the earthwork and foundation work for that project. So the purpose of this structure is basically to protect the building and allow the radiation to lessen. And then we'll be able to eventually dismantle the reactor building for final disposal. And this gives you some dimensions of this particular enclosure. So it's 158 feet long by 151 feet wide, and then 123 feet tall. Next slide. All right, here's some photos of recent work that was done in the February and March timeframe. This is the formwork here. There was rebar inside these forms. These are quite large footings, 5 feet tall by 5 feet wide. And this is the pumper truck that was used for the concrete pour. And then as you can see, this is actually after we completed what's called the grade beam construction. That's the foundation I'm referring to here. It runs the perimeter of the building on all 4 sides. And you can see that it was complete at this time. This was prior to the additional grading work, which basically brought the dirt material back up to the top of the formwork. Go ahead and next slide, please. Okay, so this video I want to show you, it was done by the contractor, and it kind of outlines the concrete pour that was done. If you want to go ahead and click on that, and let's hope for no technical issues.
I will. So I just wanted to explain what I'm going to do. I will stop sharing my screen and then upload the video and then share the voice and the video. So I just wanted to kind of explain what I get to do as I'm learning how to do this. Thank you all, and thanks, Kelly. Can everybody see the screen?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Wonderful. Oh, you know what I didn't do? Hope that.
It doesn't look like we have volume. I think there's commentary with the video.
All right, let me try this one again. My apologies, everyone.
Mark Reese did send these videos out to the board earlier, so most of us have had a chance to look at them.
The first piece of a very big puzzle is now in place. At sunrise, crews began pouring 24 loads of concrete, 240 yards total, to form the first section of the foundation surrounding the 105K East reactor. This huge chunk of concrete is what anchors the massive steel enclosure, sometimes called a cocoon, that workers will assemble to protect the building while the radioactivity in the reactor core decays over the next several decades. A lot of hard work, but the crew says it's worth it.
Wait, this is one of the biggest construction jobs I've ever been on, and it's fun. I'm enjoying myself. It's just great.
This is the first of 4 sections of the 6-foot tall, 6-foot thick foundation that will be poured.
That's a big pour. That's a big pour for the manpower and a grade beam. So there's a lot of planning to this. Many days of looking at prints, going over prints. It takes the whole team to do this. It's the rebar crew, the engineers.
Once our foundation is complete, we'll finish backfilling and we'll start erecting the steel structure, probably mid-April timeframe. And it's going to be like a giant erector set.
The K-East reactor operated from 1955 to 1971. It will be the 7th of Hanford's 9 former reactors to be placed in interim safe storage.
All right, thank you, Jillian.
So should we ask if there are any questions or comments on this video, or hold off to the end?
You're welcome to ask. I know Jolyn is just bringing the presentation back up. I just had 1 or 2 more slides. I don't know what your normal protocol is, if you guys want to call on folks, and then I'll go ahead and answer the question.
We can do that. Laura, I see your hands up.
Hi, yes. In light of recent events, when I watched this video, I wondered how secure this structure is. As on different webinars I've been on, Hanford has been mentioned as a target geopolitically. So how secure is this structure? Let's start there.
So I'm assuming, are you saying from a security standpoint, if the structure were to be targeted by an outside force?
Yes, exactly. I should have said Ukraine. I should have said Zaporizhia. Either targeted or, just sort of a loose missile.
So the design of this enclosure is to actually protect the structure more from the environmental standpoint, as far as intrusion from water, intrusion from animals that we don't want in there, etc. It wasn't designed, for instance, to take a blast. It's essentially a steel structure similar to what folks might have as far as like a steel building for a shop, and so it's steel members, and then it has the metal siding on it.
Okay, and how long will it take for it to die down, the radioactivity?
Yeah, so we have a record of decision that was issued back in '93, and so the intent of that was basically a 75-year time frame for all the reactors out there.
Mary Lou, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I was wondering if DOE inspected the foundation to make sure it was quite safe. I mean, Hanford has a history, for example, in the 324 building of leaks going out to the substrate. What kind of assuredness do we have regarding the soundness of the foundation?
So unlike 324, this concrete is not meant to be for containment. It's to hold the weight of the structure. So as I mentioned, it's, you know, it was like a 5 foot high by 5 foot wide, quite large in size, and it was designed to meet the necessary engineering load. So, you know, the weight of the structure itself, wind loads, etc. As far as the concrete oversight, the contractor had a subcontractor perform this. They provided oversight. There was also some folks representing DOE that were also were out there periodically during the concrete placement.
No, I'm not talking about the cocoon. I'm talking about the original building.
Oh,
do we know that the foundation of the original building is sound?
Of the original reactor building?
Yeah. You're protecting it from the elements quite well, but I want to be assured that it's not going to have cracks in the foundation that will allow any liquids to seep into the ground.
So there are surveillance and maintenance requirements on the original structure itself, and so that the intent of that is to determine if there were any issues, and there's been none identified.
And is there any means by which you can continue to monitor the soundness of the foundation?
So they will still be able to enter the building in order for continued surveillance. And then one thing to note too is there's no actual, you know, liquids inside of the reactor that we're concerned about leaking out.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure how you unraise your hand, but when you're finished asking your question, if you don't have another one, if you could take your unraise your hand, that would be helpful. Thanks. So Kelly, go ahead.
Okay, so this last slide right here is the fabrication of the steel was completed. Last week, we actually received the last load of steel on site. And then erection has begun, erection on the ground. So they have started assembling some of the pieces. And the next couple of weeks, we'll expect that will start going vertical, and we'll start seeing, you know, a change in the horizon. All right, that is the extent of the presentation. Was there any other questions I could answer for folks?
Yeah, I have one more question. What are the isotopes about which we're concerned?
So the one that we're waiting as far as decay goes is cobalt, is my understanding. I don't have a list of all the constituents.
What isotope of cobalt are you talking about?
I would have to.
Kelly, Kelly, this is Tom Tyner. I can interject.
Okay.
It's,
Thank you.
It's It's in the BioShield. It's when they put the BioShield together, it's 5 feet thick cocoon around the actual reactor pile. And in that, there was metal shards and a framework put in. It's cobalt-60, direct answer to your question. We did do some sampling of the BioShield when we first thought about possibly taking the core out back around the 2011, 2012 timeframe. And then for the few samples we did get, we found out that the current rate was around 10 to 15 milligram per hour was the dose rate. So if you recall, the cobalt half-life is short. I think it's around 7 to 8 years per half-life. So the purpose again too of the cocooning, the 75 years, is to allow the isotopes to decay away, so that it would be safe to actually remove the core. Does that answer your question, please?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Back to you, Kelly.
Max, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, thanks. I'll just dive in here. I'm curious to know the plan for what happens at 75 years. What happens then? Are you confident it'll be safe for people to get in there? You know, in 75 years, we'll be looking at the next generation or the generation beyond that to be working on this. And I would assume that the reactors will be planned to go to ERDF or IDF or a future landfill that we haven't even thought about on site. Can you talk about a little bit about the plan for what happens at year 75?
Yeah, so at this point, besides the record of decision, there's been, you know, planning in detail is done closer to the actual event. So we have not had additional planning at this time, as we're currently working on the next steps. For instance, with the K-East ISS, with the enclosure, and then with focusing on the K-West Basin deactivation, dewatering activities.
Okay, anything else, Max?
Well, just simply on that line, do you know, Kelly, if the site budgets, if you're assuming some major works at that point in the future, that you would be considering the financial, necessary to take down? I assume all 9 reactors have the same schedule and similar needs financially. Just something to keep in mind.
Yeah, so we do have a budget planning process. Do you want to talk to that, Tom?
I can, yes. Right now, if for the immediate short term, the care is one of our top priorities for AMRP. In the future, obviously, the planning would have to be in place financial 2 years in advance in order to proceed with the actual where the reactor is going to be dispositioned. In the EIS, environmental impact statement, we did get a categorical exclusion, or not CX, excuse me, but an addendum approved by Dr. Trier when she was EM1 to actually allow possibility of accelerating the K reactor deactivation by taking the core pile out and demolishing the reactor in place. That debris would have gone to the environmental restoration disposal facility. And as Kelly indicated, out year planning, we're talking 2060, 2070 timeframe. You're looking at having to reconsider that at the time, what's left on site, and as far as a workforce, things like that. So there's a lot of unknowns, but the eventual planning would be to dispose of the reactor on site. Back to you, Kelly.
Okay, Dan Solitz.
Yes, thank you for that presentation. I don't know why I'm getting an echo. Are you getting an echo too?
Dan, we can hear you fine.
Okay. The cocooning, does it make special provisions for inspections and then the eventual access for demolishing?
Kelly, you're on mute.
Thanks. There are access doors in the ISS that will allow them to access the reactor building for continued surveillances.
Thank you.
Every 5 years is how often we perform those surveillances.
Okay, it looks like there's no more questions, so go ahead, Kelly.
All right, actually, I'm going to turn it over to the next presenter now, to Naomi.
All right, thank you. All right, good morning, everyone. My name is Naomi Jaski. I work in the Soil and Groundwater Division here at Hanford. So I hope you don't mind. It's been about 10 years since I presented to your board before. So I thought I would just introduce myself a little bit before I began. So I'm originally from Ohio. Go Buckeyes. Buckeyes fans out there. I moved here in 2007 to work for Department of Energy. And over the last 14 years, I've worked through different areas of Hanford, including environmental compliance, building demolition, and DF law. But most of my time has spent with the Soil and Groundwater Division, specifically working on the Central Plateau areas of groundwater cleanup. And for those of you who are new, the Central Plateau is the groundwater areas in the center of the site. So today I'm here to share with you the groundwater update and all the exciting work that we have accomplished and the work that's currently ongoing. So this photo is our 200 West Pump and Treat facility. This is one of 6 pump and treat facilities on the Hanford site. There are 5 pump and treat facilities along the river, and this larger pump and treat is in the center of the site, the Central Plateau. This facility treats 2,500 gallons per minute, and the combined treatment along the river in those 5 pump and treats is 2,400 gallons per minute. So together, these facilities are treating over 2 billion gallons of groundwater every year. And we've removed 500 tons of contaminants and treated more than 2.4 billion gallons of contaminated groundwater combined at the 6 pump and treat facilities last year in 2021. So when I say that this year marked the 7th year in a row that we have treated over 2.2 billion gallons of water, and we have the goal of treating 2.2 billion gallons again this year. So we're making really great progress. Next slide, please. So I'm going to spend the majority of my time on this slide. So at the end of September, the U.S. Department of Energy, the Washington State Department of Ecology, and the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency signed 3 decision documents. So here on this map, you can see the areas where the decision documents were made. So starting in the upper left corner along the river, we have 100 BC, where a record of decision was signed. Next, going right and following the river up, we have 100K area, where an explanation of significant difference was signed. And we'll go into that in just a minute, what an explanation of significant difference is. And finally, in the center of the site, in the Central Plateau, this is the record of decision, which encompasses 2 operable units. We have 200 BP5, which is kind of the green area to the north on the east area, and 200 PO1, which is the tan color to the south. So a little bit of background. Decision documents are part of the CERCLA process. CERCLA remedial actions are documented in formal records of decisions, or what we call RODs. A little bit of history on this. In 1989, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, placed 4 areas, the 100 area, the 200 area, the 300 area, and the 1100 area of the Hanford site on the national priorities list. In anticipation of that listing, EPA, DOE, and Ecology entered into the tri-party agreement. This agreement established procedural framework and schedules for developing, implementing, and monitoring CERCLA responses on the Hanford site. So if you're interested in more information, I can dive into that in a separate presentation, but I just wanted to go over quickly before I dive into the decision documents of the basis of how we get to decision documents. So as I go through the decisions, I'll be talking about remedial design, remedial action, work plans. So these come after the record of decision and explanation of significant differences. And it's part of the CERCLA remedial process as well. And this is where the selected remedy is actually planned and implemented. So the remedial design involves all the aspects of designing the remedial action, including development of any technical drawings, specifications, operational guidance, modeling, anything is needed. So diving back into those areas, I want to touch on them a little bit more in depth so you understand exactly what we're doing. So going back to 100 BC. So that is the first star all the way to the left on that map. So some history on the 100 BC area remediation. From 1996 to 2015, 82 sites were remediated by remove, treat, and dispose, so RTD, if you've ever heard of that, under interim action records of decision. And so for that, we removed 3.15 million US tons of soil and debris. So during cleanup of those waste sites, and we excavated 85 feet below ground surface. So completion of this record of decision for a BC area was signed at the end of September. It's the 4th out of the 6 planned records of decision along the river corridor, also known as the 100 areas. So this record of decision addresses both the source areas, so the soil sites, which include 100 BC2 and 100 BC2 waste sites, and the 100 BC5 groundwater operable unit, and is consistent with all existing interim decisions and remediation activities for the 100 BC area that have occurred in the past. So we're not drastically changing the remediation process. The record of decision includes evaluation of all the waste sites, and it was decided that no further action was needed to occur for those 82 waste sites that I previously mentioned. And one additional waste site will require excavation. And this waste site is an old pipeline. It's about 20 cubic yards in size. So the record of decision also includes long-term institutional controls for soil and groundwater and monitored natural attenuation of 4 groundwater contaminants, including hexavalent chromium, strontium-90, trichloroethylene, and tritium. So monitored natural attenuation, what we call M&A, is remediation that relies on natural processes to decrease or attenuate concentrations of radionuclides and chemical contaminants in the soil and the groundwater. So scientists monitor these conditions regularly to confirm that natural attenuation is working. Monitoring ensures that contaminants attenuate fast enough to meet Hanford site cleanup objectives and that the contaminants are not spreading. So M&A is used in conjunction with active remedies or as a standalone remedy, as in this case, to achieve remedial action objectives identified in the cleanup documents. 2 primary mechanisms that M&A uses are dispersion and radiological decay. To improve the monitoring in this area, we are going to install 10 new monitoring wells, and modeling updates will be completed to support the performance monitoring of that monitored natural attenuation. So the approval of this ROD is very exciting because it's the culmination of over 10 years of collaboration between DOE and EPA with ecology support. As I mentioned, it supports the river corridor cleanup completion, being the 4th out of 6 final records of decisions needed along the river corridor. And so the next steps along with this remedy, a final remedial design, remedial action work plan, which I had discussed before, will have the details of implementing the remedy, including how many monitoring wells are needed, the locations of those monitoring wells, where we're going to lay the pipelines, all those details. And that draft was submitted to EPA at the end of March for their review. That's all I have for 100 BC area. So next I'm going to be moving up to 100K area, which is the next star there along the river. So the 100KR4 operable unit addresses groundwater contamination near Hanford's former K East and K West reactors, which Kelly just talked about along the river. Under the interim record of decision, 3 pump and treat systems have been installed and continue to operate in the 100K area. So from 2019 to 2021, a soil flushing treatability test was performed at the K West head house, and it demonstrated that soil flushing is an enhancement to continued pump and treat operations, and it expedites the removal of hexavalent chromium from the deep vadose zone. The deep vadose zone is that unsaturated soil between the land surface and the groundwater. Soil flushing uses water application on the top of the ground to push the contamination to the groundwater for remediation by existing pump and treat systems. Soil flushing was very effective at removing residual hexavalent chromium in the deep vadose zone. It removed 38 pounds of hexavalent chromium in 7 months, compared to about 17 pounds the entire preceding year. So 38 pounds in 7 months versus 17 pounds in 12 months. So you can see how we just expedited that remediation. So a similar continuing source of hexavalent chromium contamination is suspected beneath the 183.1 K East head house in the deep Vado zone. So we were talking about K West, now we're moving over to K East. So we saw that there was a similar continuing source in K East. And so we wanted to add soil flushing as an enhancement to the current pump and treat interim remedy action in that area to allow it to shorten the overall time for groundwater to meet the cleanup goals. So accelerating the removal of hexavalent chromium contamination and improving cost efficiency of that remedy. Without soil flushing, pump and treat operations could be necessary for 20 years or more because it's entirely dependent on the river state fluctuations. To add soil flushing to the remedy, an explanation of significant difference was signed at the end of September to change the 1996 record of decision. An explanation of significant difference is required when a remedial action to be taken differs significantly from the remedy selected in the record of decision, but it does not fundamentally alter the remedy with respect to the scope or the performance. So along with adding soil flushing to the remedy, the explanation of significant difference, ESD, updated the cost of the remedy as well. So we've been operating 3 pump and treat systems at 100K for many years. So we were able to use the actual cost of operations and update the cost through the projected end of operations. So next up, a revised remedial design, remedial action work plan has been submitted to EPA. Construction has started on that soil flushing system for 100K East, and the soil flushing is expected to start in June. So meanwhile, DOE and EPA are working on the remedial investigation and feasibility study to support a final record of decision for that 100K area. And the public review of that proposed plan for that action is expected in the 22 to 23 timeframe. All right, moving on to my final star, saving the best for last. So the 200 BP5 and 200 PO1 interim record of decision was signed by Department of Energy, the Washington State Department of Ecology, and the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency at the end of September. And this decision mitigates against the down gradient plume expansion until final decisions are made in the future. So a little bit of history for this area. A treatability test was completed from 2015 to 2016, and then a subsequent removal action beginning in 2016 started, and it's still operating through today. So basically we do a treatability test to make sure that yes, we can treat in this area. We didn't want the plumes to migrate, so we did a removal action, and now that that is in the works and those plumes are being controlled, we're putting it into an interim record of decision. So the removal action consisted of 2 extraction wells in the B complex area. And this decision targeted the high mobility COCs, uranium and technetium-99, targeting technetium-99 concentrations at greater than 9,000 picocuries per liter and uranium concentrations at greater than 300 micrograms per liter, which is another way of saying that it targets concentrations exceeding 10 times the drinking water standards that we have on site, which is 900 picocuries per liter for technetium and 30 micrograms per liter for uranium. The goal of this removal action was to prevent migration of the technetium-99 and uranium plumes from the area until either the performance goal is achieved or until a remedial action is in place, establishing final cleanup levels for the B complex. And the extracted groundwater of the removal is sent to the 200 West Pump and Treat facility. That's that nice facility that was shown in the last slide. The recently signed record of decision will incorporate that B complex removal action in 200 BP5, and it will expand going to the tank farms that are south, the C, A, and AX farms. And those are southeastern plumes. The cleanup levels will change from being 10 times the drinking water standards to meeting that drinking water standards. So these uranium and technetium-99 plumes, these areas warrant near-term interim action because the plumes are large and they exhibit relatively high concentrations compared to that drinking water standard. So as I mentioned earlier, the B complex plume and the C and AAX farm plumes, they're mobile and the plumes are expanding down gradient from the sources. So they're following that groundwater path. The aquifer in these areas are highly transmissive. So we know that the targeted contaminant plumes are conducive to remediation by pump and treat. And as previously demonstrated by that treatability test and by the removal action, we know that that's been successful. So we're going to be using pump and treat removal going forward. The selected interim alternative includes extraction and treating the contaminated groundwater at the 200 West Pump and Treat facility, The groundwater extraction and treatment component will consist of a network of groundwater extraction wells, conveyance piping with transfer pump stations, and modifications to the 200 West Pump and Treat facility. Waste sites and associated vital zone contamination overlying the 200 BP5 and the 200 PO1 operable units will be addressed under separate remedial actions. Characterization of the overlying waste sites is not currently adequate to predict the migration of the contamination to groundwater in many portions of the 2 groundwater operable units. So that's part of the reason why it was an interim remedy and not a final remedy for these 2 groundwater operable units. To allow time for additional source characterization to occur before coming to a final decision for that groundwater remediation, and to prevent further COC plume migration in the target remediations in the meantime. So we wanted to make sure that those plumes weren't moving to give everyone time to characterize the sources above it. We have drafted the final remedial design, remedial action work plan, sent over to Ecology for their review. This work plan will complete modeling to show where and how many wells are needed to implement our remedy, and then it will develop a sampling analysis plan to drill those planned wells. In the future, when the source areas are characterized, there will be a final decision for these 2 operable units that will replace the interim remedy that we have in place now. So, a lot of words, not very many slides. But hopefully from this briefing, you've seen the great strides that are being taken to develop and implement the groundwater remedy decisions across the Hanford site. Process improvements increase the progress and removal of groundwater contaminants, shortening the period required to get to those cleanup levels. We see this as we make modifications to the 200 West Pump and Treat facility and increase its capacity to treat the groundwater from that 200 East area, the BP5 and 200 PO1 operable units. Soil flushing has proven to be very successful at 100K West area, and we expect it to be very successful in the 100K East area. And of course, the main goal in all of this is the overarching Hanford site mission is to protect the environment and the workers in the Columbia River. So with that, I will take any questions that you might have.
Okay, thank you, Naomi. Excellent presentation. I forgot to mention earlier that this meeting is being recorded. It is a public meeting. So with that, Naomi, I think that this group, we have a number of hands up, but I think a lot of the interest would be in how much of which contaminants are currently reaching the Columbia River, and then what is the time scale that we're talking about here? And then we'll proceed to take some more questions.
Okay, so contaminants reaching the Columbia River. So I have a completely different presentation that I could show you for the 100 area pump and treats. We have hexavalent chromium along the river. It's being contained by the pump and treats, like I said, the 5 pump and treat facilities along the Columbia River. We have areas, we have aquifer tubes where we sample along the river to check to see if we have any hexavalent chromium at levels that exceed that level, the drinking water standards and the ecological standards at the river. So we have a few areas in the past where we have shown that the contamination is reaching the river in those 100 areas. So BC to D and H, so up the river and kind of around the horn, as we call it there. But over the years, we have shown that we have stopped that contamination of hexavalent chromium that's reaching the river. And we use those aquifer tubes to give us a sense of how protective that river is. In the Central Plateau area, and I also want to say that we have drinking water standards and then we have ecological standards. So a lot of the times, any areas that we are monitoring and cautiously watching and make sure that we aren't having contamination reaching the river in that 100 area, pump and treat area. We have the drinking water standards, and then we have the ecological risk standards, and so that's much lower. I believe it's 10 parts per million versus 2. And so while it would never be reaching the river at that drinking water standard, it would be at the ecological risk standard. And then at the Central Plateau, we do have a tritium plume that is moving toward the river. We have a lot of MNA, monitor natural attenuation, dispersion that's happening at that leading edge of the tritium plume, and we have an iodine plume that's moving that way. So we have the levels that we are catching at the river down gradient from that plume are less than detect. So we are currently monitoring, like I said, that leading edge, but there's a lot of dispersion that happens there before it reaches the river. And so we don't have any levels that are detect on there. And I don't have a slide that shows the plumes, but I'm sure you've seen them in the annual groundwater monitoring report that shows the plumes and their locations and approximation to the river. And then you had said time frame. What time frame specifically are you referring to?
Is this a 10-year or a 100-year exercise in groundwater remediation?
Okay, so BC, it's a final remedy. KR4, we're looking at implementing final remedy in the next few years. 200 BP5, we are the interim remedy, we're planning on cleanup in the next 12 years. Of course, we have to do modifications to 200 West Pump and Treat facility. As far as groundwater as a whole, that's an excellent question. Even when we get to cleanup and we decide that the pump and treats, the levels are below the drinking water standards, we will turn the pump and treats off. We will have a rebound period where we'll still be monitoring. And then if we see a rebound where the contaminants are high again, then we would have to turn on groundwater pump and treats again and proceed with remediation. So I can't give you an exact time. I know in the 100 areas, we're expecting that in the next 10 years that we should be looking at turning off those pump and treats along the river. The remediation along the river is much more mature. We've been pump and treat there since the 90s, in the early 90s. And so in the next 10 years, we'll be looking at turning off those pump and treats and checking the rebound. We have pockets of hexavalent chromium, which is why we're doing the soil flushing activities to get that residual hexavalent chromium out. The Central Plateau, we're just starting remediation there. And so we have, at least 30 more years, and then we'll be evaluating it to see where we stand. We're constantly adding more monitoring wells, so we are closing the knowledge gaps that we have, but it definitely depends on the monitoring, and we use that monitoring to see how the performance of the pump treat is going.
Okay, thank you. We have a number of questions. I'm not sure what order they came in, so I'm going to start at the top. Ken Niles, please.
Thanks, and thanks, Naomi. So I have kind of I guess, two parts in a way. The first is that I presume that the Oregon Department of Energy provided comments on most or all of these decision documents. So I'm wondering if either Max or Tom, Cecilia can tell us whether or not there were any significant disagreements that the Oregon Department of Energy had with these documents. And if so, then maybe Naomi can respond to those differences.
Thanks, Ken. Tom just put our comments in the chat right there. Tom, put you on the spot off the top of your head. I don't recall that there's a significant disagreement with the approach, but are you able to speak to our comments?
Yeah, there was we voiced an interest in preference for more treatment in 100 BC of groundwater instead of relying on M&A. Some of the institutional control periods were well more than 100 years, and so the cost estimation for the proposed plan only goes out 150 years. So we wanted a little more clarity and certainty on the cost estimation for the 100 BC area. The BP5 P01 interim proposed plan had an option for treating an additional technetium-99 plume in the Gable Gap, which is just to the north of that star in the middle of the page there. And the interim record of decision does not treat that plume. We would have preferred that plume also be addressed.
And then Naomi, do you have any response to those comments from Oregon that I guess are in disagreement with the UE's records of decision and ESD?
Yeah, yeah. Thanks, Tom, for summarizing. First off, I just want to say thank you for the comments. We definitely take all the comments into account, make sure that we have as high a document quality as we can, of course. For 200 BP5, there was a lot of discussion on the Gable Gap area there in that plume. All the modeling and the monitoring that we've done in that area shows that the plume is stagnant. And for the costs associated with putting in extraction wells, and it would require an injection well because that water is so stagnant, we had the reason for the interim action was because we wanted to stop the plumes that were migrating, and that plume is not migrating, so it didn't meet the criteria for putting it in the interim action. And so that was our decision moving forward, to just address the B complex and the C and A and AX farm plumes, which we were concerned would be migrating out of the Central Plateau. For 100 BC, I'm not as familiar with that, so I can't directly comment on that. Hopefully the comments were in the responsiveness summary attached with the ROD, the comment responses. And they would have done a better job than I could attempt to do today. Because like I said, I'm more familiar with Central Plateau. But if you have existing concerns after you look at the responsiveness summary, reach out and we can get someone who's more of a technical expert than I am to address this.
Okay, Ken, anything further?
No, thank you.
Okay, Dan, you're next on my list.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Naomi. I'm interested in what you've learned about the rate of transfer when you do these flushing operations for the various contaminants concerned. How long does it take to make its way through the soil columns, and are you getting a good feel for the various different kinds of soil columns and how long it takes for them to transit to groundwater?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And I wish I had my technical expert who was in charge of soil flushing, because they could. They, based on the soil in the 100K area, they knew when that I guess you call it like the slug of hexamount chromium was going to hit the groundwater, and they saw it in the extraction wells. And I can't tell you, let me see if I have any information quickly that I could pull up. But they were able to see it. And so now moving into 100K East, because it's very similar, and the geology is very similar, we expect to know, like, okay, we're going to turn on the soil flushing here, and we expect to see it hit groundwater in a certain amount of time. And I just don't want to misquote it. So I'm going to kind of search through it as we go through the rest, and I'll let you know if I find something. If not, I can share it with Gary and Jolynn, maybe a little fact information on that, because it is really exciting.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm really interested in knowing that and what you can extrapolate to the larger soil columns from that.
Okay, yeah, I'll see what I can find while we're here.
Okay, Laura Feldman, you have a question?
Yes, maybe Tom already covered this, but B109, high-level waste leaking since last year. According to Heart of America Northwest, 1,300 gallons a year potentially, and you're not cleaning this up. Is that correct?
So let me address that. Yeah, thanks for the question. B109 is in the B complex area, and we have had pump and treat in that area since 2015 as that treatability test. The plume that we're currently cleaning up is not from the B109 leak. Modeling has shown that B109 leak is very small in comparison to the plumes that we're actually cleaning up in volume and in concentration. But the area under B109 is completely hydraulically controlled by those extraction wells. So what I mean to say is we are cleaning up technetium-99 and uranium in that area, but it's not from B109. It's from intentionally discharges that happen. Those intentional discharges stopped in the 60s. So it's from those discharges that created plumes. And so this is from production days when we were using the separations facilities, the B plant, Purex, things out there. And they did discharges based on that. And so we have those 2 extraction wells, and we have a really nice graphic that shows the capture lines of those extraction wells. And those capture lines completely encompass everything that's under B109. So
Can I access that graphic?
I believe it's been publicly released, but I'll have to work that through Jolynn.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, Max.
Yeah, thanks, Naomi. I have a few basic questions, and just help me understand. When you extract the contaminants from groundwater, what happens with those contaminants?
Yeah,
Where do
great
you
question.
put them?
I want to say it depends, but that's not a very good answer for you. So depending on the contaminant, so I'll focus on 100 areas first. So the contaminant is hexavalent chromium. So hexavalent chromium, it goes through the extraction wells. So just to give you a little brief background of extraction network. So we have a plume. We've characterized it with monitoring wells. We have over 3,000 locations of monitoring wells on the Hanford site that's sampled. So to close those knowledge gaps that I talked about before. So we know where the plume is. We put extraction wells in the heart of that plume. And where we can, we put injection wells to push that contamination to that extraction well to help with cleanup, to expedite cleanup. So that contaminated groundwater, highest concentration that we can, right, is piped to a pump and treat facility. For hexavalent chromium, we use ion exchange systems. So ion exchange, they're really big vessels. They have really pretty yellow crystal resins in there. And as the contamination is flushed from the top of the vessel to the bottom, it has 3 different vessels. It has a lead, which is the lead, so it gets the highest contamination. Then it goes into lag. That kind of cleans off any residual contamination that's in there, and then a polish. And once it gets out of that polish, we sample it, and it's below the drinking water standards at that point. So the ion exchange resins have an affinity towards that contamination, that contaminant that we're cleaning. So in this case, it would be hexavalent chromium. When you go to the 200 West area, we have 2 parts of the facility. We have the radiological building, which is where uranium and technetium-99 are treated. And then we have air strippers, and we have the granulated activated carbon that take out the carbon tetrachloride. But going back to that, we have ion exchange as well. But the ion exchange vessels are a little smaller, and they have different resin in them. And the resins, we have a resin that has an affinity towards uranium, so pulls out that uranium as it goes through the column. And then it's proceeded to go through another vessel, ion exchange vessel, where it takes out the technetium. So the technetium is taken out. And so then the water at each stage, so now it's missing the technetium, now it's missing the uranium, and then it goes, and if it has levels of carbon tetrachloride, then it'll go through the air strippers, remove the air strippers, or remove the carbon tetrachloride. And then that contamination from the air stripper is contained in the granulated activated carbon. And so that becomes waste at that point. So if you're looking down the chain, so now the water is clean. So now the contaminants are in the resin. So the resin is when it gets to a certain, when it's spent or used, where it doesn't have an affinity anymore, the water is coming through. We're seeing the levels in that lag column getting higher. We know it's time to change out that lead column. And so that lead column, we take the resin out, we stabilize it. There's different ways to stabilize it, and then it is disposed of. And it's disposed of meeting all the disposal requirements and stabilization requirements. It's disposed of at ERDF.
Okay.
I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, that was I just wanted to get to so all of it ultimately, whether it's radioactive or chromium, ends up at ERDF. The resins when they're spent.
Yes.
Okay. That's fine. Thank you. Can I ask one more?
One clarification. So the granulated activated carbon, it is generated off-site.
Oh, okay. Very good. When you have clean water coming out of your treatment system, what do you do with that clean water?
So that clean water is sent in pipelines to those injection wells. And like I said, those injection wells are at the outside of that carbon tetrachloride plume because that's the highest risk driver. I'm talking about Central Plateau. Sorry, I always go back to
That's fine. That's fine. For yours.
So it's pushing that dirty water towards the center of those extraction wells. So it's kind of creating a hydraulic boundary of clean water, keeping it in the soil, in the Central Plateau, specifically talking about the carbon tetrachloride plume.
Like you're reusing that water. I guess what I'm ultimately thinking about a couple things is, a water limited environment, and in an area that's going to be probably more arid in the future with changing climates, making sure that, you know, reusing water and conserving water as much as possible would be a priority for us.
Absolutely. And the soil flushing, we are using water from the treatment system. So we're using treated water to do that soil flushing. And like you said, absolutely, we have to continually can't think of the word, but refresh our aquifer, right? Or we're not gonna. We need the liquid flow in there to clean out the contaminants and to create that movement for cleaning. So I agree.
Thank you.
Dan, your hand is still up. Do you have another question? Perhaps not.
No, I'll lower it. I thought you guys would lower my hand, but I'll lower it. Sorry about it.
Okay, thanks. Naomi, this is a very general question. Are there perched aquifers on this site that are contaminated?
Yes, there is a perched water right beside the B complex area, so kind of right where that star is in the middle. We have extraction wells there, and we're currently installing more extraction wells there. The trick with the perched water zone is it's very thin, right? And it dewaters quickly. And so we're trying to find different areas where we can add more wells and get that pumping up. So right now it's at about 1 gallon per minute that we're able to extract from that area, but we are continuously monitoring it. And we have plans for new extraction wells in that area because we want to, stop the contamination and get it while it's highly concentrated before it could somehow infiltrate down into the groundwater.
Okay, thank you. Mary Lou, you have a question or comment?
I think you're muted, Mary Lou.
Thank you. What exactly is a perched water zone with respect to the deep Vados zone?
So the perched water zone, it's a zone with restrictive permeability that lies above. So it's in the deep Vados zone, but it is basically a perched aquifer. So I use my hands a lot. So if you had like a layer of sand or not sand, a layer of like clay here that's causing the water to basically sit in a bowl, and then that contamination just sits in that bowl with it, and it could very slowly contribute to the groundwater, but for the most part, it sits in this bowl. And so we want to extract just in this bowl because it's the higher concentration than if it were to reach the groundwater. Of course, you have the image of food coloring, right? A drop of food coloring into a glass of water. It's much easier to clean up the green food coloring in the tube than it is before it reaches the water.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that was a good description of what a perched aquifer is. So thank you. Any further question? Oh, Laura. Your hand
Yes, thank you. Where is the ERDF facility?
ERDF facility, oh, I keep thinking you can see my mouse. It is in the 200 west area, and it's in the start of UP1. So if you're looking at this map, if you see where it says 200 west, if you just go south from there, I believe that is where the ERDF, and Kelly, or you guys can tell me if I'm wrong, but I believe it is in that area there.
Yes, it's in the 200 west area. Yes.
Oh, okay. I thought it was shipped off site for a minute. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, I think if there's no other questions on groundwater, Naomi, thanks for excellent presentation.
Thanks. It was nice talking with you guys this morning. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Oops.
Yeah, hello, this is Gary Piles. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes. Go
Okay,
ahead.
I guess I'm
I think I'm next. So if you want to go to the next slide. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and start off with a 5-minute video. We'll kind of walk you through a little bit of the brief history of the capsules while we're starting this project to remove them from the pool cell and put them into a long-term dry storage configuration. And then more importantly, it'll kind of show you the process for how we're going to do it. Kind of walk you through the different areas within WESF we're going to use, as well as describe a little bit about the transfer equipment that'll be used at WESF and the vertical concrete cask themselves where the capsules will be stored. So I'm kind of a visual person, so I like to kind of start off with that, and I'll kind of give you an idea of the process again. So then as I talk to you about the status, you'll have a better idea of what I'm talking about.
Okay, I'm gonna.
Okay, so go ahead and ready to start whenever you are.
Okay, thanks so much.
The U.S. Department of Energy and contractor Central Plateau Cleanup Company are reducing the risk in the 200 East area of the Hanford site in Washington state. Engineers have developed a safe and compliant process to remove 1,936 highly radioactive cesium and strontium capsules from underwater storage inside the Waste Encapsulation and Storage Facility, or WESF, to a safer dry storage configuration. In the 1970s, cesium and strontium were removed from waste tanks at Hanford to reduce the temperature of the waste inside of the tanks. The capsules represent about a third of the total radioactivity on the Hanford site. While they are currently in a safe configuration, WESF is an aging facility. Transferring them to dry storage would eliminate the possibility of a release of radioactive material in the unlikely event of a major earthquake that might result in the loss of pool storage water and subsequent overheating and breach of the capsules. Teams of well-trained personnel will accomplish this work safely and compliantly, benefiting from the lessons learned and proficiencies gained from training with the equipment at a full-scale, non-radiological mock-up. To begin the removal process, workers on a catwalk will use long-reach pole tools to access the capsules that are stored under 13 feet of water, which provides adequate radiation shielding for the workers. Workers will retrieve the capsule and move it to the transfer chute connecting to the hot cell, or G cell. From outside G cell, workers will use manipulator arms to bring the capsule near a shielded window to inspect the capsule for damage. They will also verify the capsule's identity to ensure the correct capsules are loaded in such a way to comply with the capsule storage thermal analysis. If operators find a damaged capsule, they will place it in a larger overpack capsule. Then, workers using the manipulator arms and a special insertion tool will place the capsule into a universal capsule sleeve, or UCS. The UCS can hold up to 6 capsules. Once the UCS is full, the air inside will be displaced with helium, which helps dissipate the heat from the capsules. Following a successful leak test, the UCS is ready for transfer to the truck port. Using cameras, workers will guide a grapple over the UCS, hoist it out of G cell and into the Shielded Dry Transfer System, or DTS. The DTS is a large shielded cask that will transfer the UCS from G cell into the WESF Canyon to the truck port, using a 15-ton crane. In the truck port is an 11-foot tall, 10-foot diameter cask shielded with reinforced concrete. In the cask is a storage container capable of holding up to 22 universal capsule sleeves. A robotic welder will seal the lid of the inner storage container. The air will be removed, and then the container will be filled with helium to aid in keeping the capsules cool. Once the helium is in place, a second outer lid will be placed on the storage container and welded in place. Once the loading process is complete, workers will open the truck port roll-up door and remove the cask. The equipment used to transport the cask has been repurposed from a previous DOE project, avoiding millions of dollars of cost. The vertical cask transporter, or VCT, a specially designed hydraulic lift unit, is used to lift the cask. The tug will tow the VCT and cask to the capsule storage area, a 90-foot by 90-foot secure outdoor storage pad located approximately 1/4 mile from WESF. The cask will be placed on the pad and will be connected to a temperature monitoring system. The cask will be placed in one of the 25 locations on the pad. Once the final capsule has been retrieved and the final cask has been placed onto the storage pad, WESF can be prepared for demolition. These cesium and strontium capsules will remain in a safe and passive condition until a permanent storage location is available. The U.S. Department
Okay, thanks. Anybody have any questions on the video before we move on to kind of give you a status of where we're at with the project?
So I see a couple hands up. Dan, you were first.
Well, I'm not sure it's on the video. It's what happens afterwards. Is there plans to keep a hot cellar? Is there another hot cell on site that the cesium capsules can be removed in case they want to put them in the high level bit waste? Or is that
Yeah,
something that'll have to be built?
Right now, there is no plans to keep G-Cell or WESF operational. We plan to put it in a cold and dark configuration, and then would be D&D with with B plant. Right now we haven't determined the disposition path for these capsules. There's been discussions about potentially them going to a high-level waste repository, which obviously is not available at the time, and so we will have to. There is other spent fuel here on site that we will have to repackage, and we will have to build that capacity to do that at a later date. Once repository is available, and so the idea would be if that is the destination, then we could we'd have to kind of rebuild that capability at that time.
Okay, thank you. Another question: the old hot cell. Are you going to do some examination of that just to get a sense of what the radiation does to concrete?
Again, I don't know if there's any plans to do any studies. I know there has been some discussion about how radiation impacts concrete, and I know that's been a concern, with the pool cells, because there is a high amount of activity that have been there for a long period of time, and there has been calculations done that has demonstrated that the concrete is still has a structural stability to where they currently are, but that is a concern, and so that's one reason why we're moving forward with this project, right, to get them out of there. So, but I'm not aware of any specific actions to actually do any sampling at this time.
Okay, thank you. One final question. I listened to a Nuclear Waste Technical Review Board meeting on spent fuel management, spent fuel aging management, and they mentioned something about a lead cast project in conjunction with the pad there, where they're going to take one of these, if I understand it right, one of these storage capsules and instrument it, and then see how the environment affects it over time.
Yep, that's correct. So we do have an extra. We have right now there's going to be a total of 19 vertical concrete casks that will be loaded and stored on the capsule storage pad, and we do have a 19th vertical concrete cask where we're going to have an aging management program to kind of monitor that, just as you mentioned, so we can see over time if there's any impact on the vertical concrete casks and whether or not they're showing signs of wear or deterioration.
Thank you.
So a related question might be, does the radioactive decay in these canisters result in any hydrogen gas buildup?
So it's my understanding that, so I don't know if I can answer the question. I'll have to get back to you on that. I know they've done quite a bit of thermal analysis and radiological analysis to demonstrate that the the vertical concrete cask and the dry storage configuration will be safe. But I can't speak specifically to the hydrogen buildup inside, if any. I think.
Okay. Mary Lou, you're up next.
Yeah, I was wondering what the mass of those casks is.
Yep. So the fully loaded vertical concrete cask will weigh about 169,000 pounds. Again, it's each cask is basically able to hold about 132 capsules. That's the max. You got six capsules in each universal capsule sleeve with 22 universal capsule sleeves loaded to each cask. Of course, again, not all of them will be loaded with 132. We do have, again, a load plan to make sure we maintain maintain the cask below the temperature requirements.
So you say the VCCs weigh 169,000 when they're fully loaded?
Fully loaded, that's correct, yeah.
And is there any possibility of monitoring the concentration of helium in those as they age?
No, so they will be completely sealed, as you saw in there. There will be the vertical transportable storage container will be welded shut, and so the only thing we plan to monitor is the temperature itself.
So is the surface? So you're talking about surface temperature?
That's correct. Yep.
So with all those layers, is surface temperature really useful?
Well, the surface temperature is really just to monitor the outside. So again, we have to maintain the salt and capsule temperature interface below a certain amount. And so through the thermal calculations, we'll just kind of monitor the outside of that temperature, make sure it stays, to just kind of see if we have any blockage of the vents that might see it, the capsules kind of heat up, and we don't expect there to be any issues. But if we see that temperature increase, then we know to get out there and kind of clear the vents so that the passive cooling system that's designed in the vertical concrete cask continues to work as needed.
So what happens if that passive cooling system fails?
Well, again, they've been designed so that even if it fails, we'd still be able to maintain the temperature below that temperature, the salt capsule temperature interface limits. But again, we will have, like I say, the temperature monitoring system will be monitored on a daily basis, and if it shows any increase, then we'll get someone out there to clear those vents during operations.
Thank you.
And I'm sorry,
Laura Feldman.
Yes, I wonder how susceptible these casks are, or the storage pad is, to seismic events, wildfires, other climate change events.
So again, the capsule storage pad is a nuclear facility, so it's been designed to be able to meet certain seismic requirements. And then, of course, and we'll get there. Maybe when we get to the presentation, I'll kind of show you how the capsule storage pad looks like. And so it's fenced off, so to make sure that we keep any combustibles away from the pad itself in the event of a fire. So.
Thank you.
Gary, if one assumes that someday these packages will be transported and put into long-term storage somewhere, can you address the issues of compatibility, packaging compatibility with transportation and storage might happen at some future date?
Yeah, so I don't know if I can really answer that question. Like I said, right now we just have the requirements for storing them there on the pad. in the future, if you're talking about disposition and going off to like a repository or someplace else, we would have to meet the waste acceptance criteria and repackage it to meet those requirements. And so really there is no requirements yet since we don't have a repository. So it's kind of hard to speak to exactly how that would happen.
So out in the future, we're going to have multiple waste streams that will all have to be repackaged before they're transported and stored.
Potentially, yeah. I mean, like I said, it all depends on what the requirements of the repository or, again, or wherever we dispose them is. Their waste acceptance criteria is it may require us to repackage it, or we may not need to.
Okay, thank you. Max, you had your hand up?
I did, but I realized that, Gary, I think you have a couple more slides to go through here.
Yeah.
You might answer my question. I was going to.
Okay. Yeah, let me go through the rest of the slides here. What I thought I would do is just kind of give you a status on where we're at with the project. We've kind of breaking the project down into kind of 4 sub-projects, if you will. And so I'll go through each one of them. The first one is the WESF modification project. And so really this project is to modify the facility and get it ready to install the equipment and operate the equipment that will be used to do the transfer from G-cell or from the pool cell into a vertical concrete cask. That we did get approval to start construction back in January of 2021. And so we've been modifying the facility for over the last year. And so just kind of pointing out some of the modifications that we're making. If you look to the picture actually on the right, you'll see all the tubing there. That's tubing that'll be used for the compressed air system as well as for the evacuation and helium and backfill systems. All the equipment that'll be used in G-cell and some of the equipment up in the canyon area all will be operated using this compressed air system. So you can see the kind of the flat panel there in the middle. That's where the control panel would sit. That you will operate all the different equipment. And then again, in the kind of the top left corner there, you can kind of see the tail end of the air compressor tank, right? So that's a 400-gallon air tank, and again, will be used to operate all that equipment. If you look to the picture on the left, that's the manipulator repair shop, and really wanted to point out here is you see all the taping on the floor. These are 3-foot thick flooring, and the walls are in some areas are 2-foot thick, and they've got a lot of rebar. So there's been a lot of work to go through and try to locate all that rebar before we drill through, make any type of penetrations through the flooring or the wall. And that's because if you penetrate and you hit the rebar, and then you have to go back and do a kind of a series of calculations to show that the structure still meets the seismic requirements. So we don't want to do that. We'd rather just make sure we find those rebar and then drill and not have an impact to the facility. So again, this is up above, the manipulator's up above, so all that tubing you see to the right, some of that will eventually go up into the manipulator repair shop area and then to the left into the canyon. Next slides. Okay, so again, just some more pictures of the WESF modification project. This is looking outside. The picture on the left, that's just outside the truck port. So right on the other side of that blue roll-up door is the truck port area where the vertical concrete cask will be loaded. And then we had outside the truck port, there was a 242B, I believe, a well house. So we had to remove that well house and the well. There's a lot of electrical lines going underneath as well as above the truck port area. Those had to be removed and kind of excavated some soil down a few feet, put some engineered soil, compacted it, and you can see the rebar. And then actually they did the concrete pour in March of this year. You can see there's a lot of rebar there. That's to support the weight of these vertical concrete casks. Again, weighing about 169,000 pounds fully loaded. And although there's no pictures inside the truck port, they have done quite a bit of work. When they move the vertical concrete using the air pallet, moving the vertical concrete cask into the truck port, there's only about 2 inches of clearance on either side, so it's a very tight fit. And so within the truck port, there's a lot of piping that runs along the walls and duct work, and so all that had to be moved. So in order to make room for that cast to be moving out. And then if you look to the picture on the right, you see 2 HVAC units. Those are being installed to help maintain the temperatures within the operational areas in WESF below a certain below 80 degrees Fahrenheit. So this will support cooling the G cell area, the truck port, as well as the canyon. Again, construction efforts continue, and we hope by this time next year, all the modifications will be completed, and then we would be simply waiting for the equipment to arrive to install. Next slide. Okay, so moving on to the next, I guess, sub-project, if you will, the cast storage system itself. That's fabrication of the equipment that will be used to transfer the capsule, as well as that includes also the vertical concrete cask and all the components that go within that cask. There's a lot of vendors working on this. It's really quite amazing how many different companies are being used to support this effort. You have Highline here in Richland, Washington, that is fabricating the recovery shield assembly, which you see there, as well as the G-cell upbender. ABW in I believe it's in Aberdeen, Washington. I think they're building the universal capsule sleeves, the dry transfer system, and they'll be doing the cold spray on the transportable storage containers. The transportable storage containers, as well as the aluminum insert, is actually being fabricated by Hitachi Ozozen in Japan. The automatic weld system there that you see is actually being fabricated by Liberty up in Canada. There's a gantry that will be used in the canyon that'll move that automatic weld system over the top of the VCC that was built by LSI in Chicago. So, there's quite a few vendors involved in this, and so it's been quite an effort to make sure everything is being done in coordinating with all the vendors. So there's two sets of equipment, I'm sorry, that'll be fabricated. There's the test equipment, which will be used in a mock-up, which I'll talk about here shortly. And then there's the production equipment that will be used at WESF. And so what you see here is the test equipment. All the test equipment has been fabricated, and a factory acceptance testing has been completed, except for on the dry transfer system. They're hoping to do that factory acceptance testing done, have that factory acceptance testing done by mid-May timeframe. Right now, there's an integration test that's being performed. There's going to be 2 integration tests, one on the G-cell equipment, which is currently being done at Highline here in Richland, Washington. Once that's completed, then they'll package it up and then send it over to Massive to be installed at the mock-up. Once the DTS is done, that will then be shipped over to Highline, and they'll do another integration test to make sure all the components are working as they should together before, again, being shipped to mock-up. As they complete those factory acceptance testing, then we kind of go ahead and allow the contractor to start working on fabricating the production equipment. Again, that will be placed in WESF. So again, just kind of highlight the recovery shield assembly there on the left. That'll be in G-cell. So if there's a condition where we need to do some maintenance on the upender, we can slide the universal capsule sleeves and the capsules into that, and then it'll close it, and it's basically like a lead clamshell. The picture on the far right is the upender. Again, that will be in G-cell. You can see it's right in front of where the guy's standing is a universal capsule sleeve. And again, I won't go into details because you kind of saw how that will kind of work in the video. And then, of course, the automatic weld system there on the bottom middle. Next slide. Okay, so the third sub-project field is this full-scale mock-up I mentioned before. This was being built at the material and storage facility, the massive facility, right? And so again, just kind of highlight, you can see this is kind of replicates the operational area looking into G cell. You can see all the tubing that goes into G cell, again, that operates the equipment using the compressed air system. If one thing to kind of point out is if you see those control panel or those panels there that are in there, those are just metal boxes with decals on them. They're really trying to make the mock-up look very, very similar to what the conditions you'll find at WESF. So as they, start to do their operational development procedures and new training, and they can make sure that there's actually no obstacles that will get in the way of operations. This is a very kind of critical or key point of the project, right? Because again, this is where they'll build up procedures, they'll do training, they'll practice upset conditions, get ready for readiness activities, really allow the operators to be proficient at moving capsules around before we actually start doing the work at WESF and working with these highly contaminated capsules. Next slide. And then finally, the dry storage area where the capsules will be placed into long-term storage. We actually started construction on this, and it was in February of 2020, and construction was pretty much complete at the end of last fiscal year. There was a list of punch list items that needed to be complete before we can turn over the facility over to operations, and there's still kind of one remaining punch list item that needs to be complete. Basically, they back in August of 2021, they ordered these connectors that will connect the temperature monitoring system to the vertical concrete cask. And so because of supply chain issues, we've been having a hard time getting those connectors delivered. And so we're still waiting for those. But once we get those, then we'll install that, and construction will be complete. Again, as mentioned, it's designed to hold 25 casks, but we only expect to use it to load 18. And then I think that's the end of the. So I guess with that, open up to any other questions.
Yeah, thanks, Gary. Looks like we've got a couple of questions. We got about 5 minutes before we take a short break. Laura?
Yes, thank you so much, Gary. This is exciting to see movement on this transfer process, really. I just wonder how long it will take ultimately.
Yeah, so we do have a TPA milestone to get these out by August of 2025. I can tell you that that milestone is at risk, and we've discussed this with ecology. As you can tell, from the pictures, we have made significant progress moving forward. But our critical path is the fabrication and installation of the production, the testing and the production equipment. And as I said, we've got a lot of vendors supporting that effort, but all of them have been impacted by COVID one way or the other, whether it's because of supply chain issues, a backlog of work at these facilities, expertise. There are a lot of welding experts are needed for this work, and so if they're out, that has caused delays. And so we are seeing kind of an impact to the overall project. So, but again, we continue to move forward. Right now, we're about 5 or 6 months behind from our original schedule, but we're continuing to move forward and do the best we can. Right now, I would say we're probably looking at again, just guess. Again, we're probably about 6-7 months from our current schedule. When we get into the mock-up, right now we expect it would take about a month to load each vertical concrete cask. as we do operations. But again, when we, with a mock-up, as we go through the procedures and do that proficiency, we'll get a better idea of exactly how long it'll actually take, and probably be able to give you a better answer then on when we think we'd be done.
Okay, thank you.
Time for one last question, Mary Lou.
I just wanted to share with others that when you're talking about cesium and strontium, you're talking about fairly short half-lives compared to some of these isotopes. So like cesium has a 30-some year half-life, strontium 20-some years, which is nothing compared to uranium and technetium. The bad thing about those two isotopes have hundreds of thousands or millions of years of half-life. But the bad thing about cesium and strontium is that they're very soluble in water and therefore highly mobile in the environment.
Okay, thank you. So if there's no more questions, I don't see any more hands up. So Jolynn, Kelly, Naomi, Gary, thank you very much for your presentations and discussion this morning. We're going to break for 15 minutes, so we'll get back in session at 10 a.m.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.
John, do you need to test out your slides at all?
I'm happy to do that if you want me to.
Can you get to your controls and go to your screen? Can you share your screen okay?
Yeah, how's that look?
I see it.
So should I put that on full on the start the slideshow? How does that look?
Yeah, go ahead. Let's see what that looks like. Presentation screen's up.
Okay,
Look
if
at
that
your
works,
notes on the side.
yeah, I'll go with that if that works. Yeah, that's the next slide is showing there.
Okay.
If that works, I'll do it.
Looks good.
And I think I talked with Jeff and he's going to have me go first.
Does Jeff have any slides?
Good morning, John.
That is the case?
That is the case.
Good, we coordinated then. I like that.
Well,
Jeff, do you have any slides?
I do. I have about 5 of them, but I think it won't be an issue to test. Famous last words, it won't be an issue to test, right?
I'll remember you said that. Okay.
Okay, just turned over 10 o'clock, so we will reconvene the meeting. Our next speakers are John Price from the Washington Department of Ecology, followed by Jeff Schramm, I hope I pronounced that right, from U.S. Environmental Protection Agency in Hanford. So John, turn it over to you.
Yeah, good morning, board members and guests. So I'm John Price. I've been with Ecology for 21 years, been the Tri-Party Agreement Section Manager for the past 13 years. I normally like to have lots of good pictures. I don't have any pictures today because of the subject matter, so I apologize for that. Please feel free to interrupt me. I can't see hands. Maybe I'll see hands. I see a little picture in the lower right hand there, but not sure I can see hands. So feel free to interrupt me if you have questions at any time, and certainly look forward to meeting with you in person at your next meeting. I like to sit at the front of the room and have the more informal conversation that you all have at the board meeting.
Hey, John, real quick before you jump in, you're sharing your presenter's view. So if you want to go to the display settings and flip that around, there you go.
Okay, thank you for that.
Sure thing.
Okay. All righty. So what I'm going to talk about this morning is tank waste holistic negotiations, the life cycle scope, schedule, and cost report. Those are one slide each. I've got a slide on upcoming tri-party agreement changes for the Richland Operations Office. Got quite a number of slides about environmental justice, and then a slide about the transition back to in-person public meetings, and then I'll have one slide about ecology recruitment. Tank waste holistic negotiations. So it was 3 years ago in May that Ecology Director Bellin sent a letter to DOE proposing holistic negotiations for tank waste retrieval and treatment. They're called holistic negotiations because they cover changes to both the tank waste consent decree and also the tri-party agreement. We've been negotiating, not the whole 3 years. We were a little bit slow getting started, but it is 3 years now since that letter was sent. The negotiations include the tri-parties, DOE, Ecology, and EPA, plus the U.S. Department of Justice and the Washington Attorney General's Office. And I just want to note Oregon's role. If we do reach agreement, we are required to consult with Oregon before finalizing any draft schedule milestones. And that requirement is in a memorandum of agreement that Oregon and Washington have for Hanford. That's about all I can tell you because we have a mediation agreement, and the mediation agreement stipulates that the parties will not discuss status or progress during the negotiations. I can share with you, I'm personally pretty optimistic about where we are right now. I think most people feel pretty good, but a deal isn't done until it's actually signed. If we do reach tentative agreement, that's the tri-parties plus the Department of Justice has to endorse the deal as the Department of Energy's lawyer. We will follow with outreach and public comment. When we reached the tank waste settlement agreement in 2010, we had regional public meetings, I think 5 different locations, including Hood River and Portland, and had a public comment period. So I would expect a similar process this time around. So hopefully that will happen soon. The Hanford Life Cycle Scope, Schedule, and Cost Report is a report that estimates the cost of the remaining Hanford cleanup. That comes out every 3 years because of a tri-party agreement milestone. And it estimates the cost of what we call the active cleanup schedule. That goes from 2022 to 2078. There's also a component called long-term stewardship, which is taking care of the site after active cleanup, and that is estimated through FY 2095. And because we had a question earlier about the reactors and dismantling those, there is a cost estimate in the life cycle report. It's $1.9 billion for those reactors, although it is carried in a separate cost account at DOE headquarters. And I've included the link here to the life cycle report. The public feedback period ended April 29th, And we get a lot of interest on the life cycle report because the cost numbers, there's a low end estimate and a high end estimate, and those range from $300 billion to $640 billion. So Ecology and DOE get a lot of interest from the Government Accountability Office, the Federal Facilities Task Force, and the news media. That's now one of the biggest liabilities in the federal budget. We have a number of tri-party agreement changes coming up. We've also been working on these for several years. On April 27th, we signed a tentative agreement that changes or creates 17 schedule milestones for the Hanford Central Plateau cleanup. And I've bolded a couple words in the text of the tentative agreement that parties signed. It refers to an adaptive milestone approach. That's some of the bolded letters for identifying scope and schedule for the Central Plateau work. And the text also says the approach will utilize decision logic tools to help us with the negotiations. DOE will be coming out with a fact sheet that defines what both of those are. I'm assuming the Oregon board will be pretty interested in those, and there will be a public comment period on that. I'm guessing there'll be a public meeting or meetings as well. So that's something to look forward to. Just pausing for a minute if anybody wants to finish reading that. Okay, I'm going to talk quite a bit about environmental justice because we have parallel efforts going on by the three agencies. Ecology is working on environmental justice because of something called the Healthy Environment for All, or HEAL Act. That's a state act. This past January, EPA released a draft environmental justice action plan for its land protection and cleanup programs. That's what they call the Superfund or circular work now. And in November, DOE, that's November 2021, DOE released its Environmental Justice Implementation Progress Report for fiscal year 2020. So you can see that all three agencies have some initiatives going on. Because we have parallel efforts, we've talked about environmental justice at the highest level of Hanford cleanup several times a year, 2 or 3 times a year. The ecology director, the EPA regional 10 administrator, and the DOE site manager get together and talk about various topics. So because of these parallel efforts, when they met in April, they talked about environmental justice and they talked about collaborating between these three parallel efforts. So a little bit more about environmental justice and especially the HEAL Act. So this just became law in 2021, but actually ecology was in the forefront of environmental justice. Way back in 1995, Millie Piazza of Ecology did a study about environmental justice. And so we really have been a leader in this, have been doing a lot of implementation, but now it's the law for us. The law says that various Washington state agencies, including all ecology, are covered by the law, but lets other agencies opt in. We've created an Office of Equity and Environmental Justice within ecology, and the individual I mentioned, Millie Piazza, who's been working on this since 1995, is the manager of ecology's Office of Equity and Environmental Justice. Here's a definition of environmental justice. It grew out of a recognition that things like racially restrictive covenants had concentrated minority and low-income populations in perhaps more industrialized areas where they were more heavily impacted by pollution. So that's kind of a core concept, is that certain populations are unfairly or disproportionately impacted by pollution. One of the key aspects of environmental justice is on the first line of the italics there. Environmental justice means a fair treatment and meaningful involvement. So sometimes with heavily impacted populations, there can be some barriers to their participation in the cleanup. Those might be language barriers if you have populations who have a lot of non-English speaking or English as a second language speaking, and sometimes also they may not have access to digital information. So a lot of our public participation now occurs through emails and email notices and information that's available on the internet. And if individuals do not have good access to the internet, or maybe not even have a computer, they don't have access to that information, and really have a barrier to participating in cleanup and waste management decisions. So some of the emphasis of environmental justice is trying to ensure equal access or better access. For Washington, since we have to comply with the HEAL Act, these are the goals that we have. So I kind of mentioned already, remedy the past policies and practices that led to disparities in impacted communities, and then try and prevent future impacts through how we do our decision making and the choices that we make. You'll notice the third bullet there: reduce exposure to environmental hazards within Indian country. There are 3 tribal governments that have some treaty rights at Hanford, so that's going to be a key for us at Hanford. And then the last bullet there for Washington, we have to track and measure the accomplishments. So we're doing metrics or measuring sticks of different aspects of environmental justice, and that's something we're going to evaluate from time to time and try and help improve our programs. Okay, so I'm going to talk now about the transition back to in-person public meetings. We've all been doing these virtual meetings for a few years now, but Ecology is anticipating going back to in-person meetings. And so we're starting to think about what that would look like. One thought we have is that we're going to have hybrid meetings where some people will be attending in person and other people will be online or on the phone. So we don't know quite how to do good hybrid meetings yet. So we're going to be learning from our experiences. I think one of the challenges will be to give equal opportunity to the online attendees versus people that are attending in person. I know I've been involved in a lot of the Hanford public meetings over the years. I think it may have been as far back as 2016, the last time that we had regional public meetings on a particular decision or subject matter. So we're going to have to start those up again at some point and see how that works and what kind of attendance we get. So at times we've had as many as 5 regional meetings in locations like Seattle, Portland, Hood River, the Tri-Cities, of course, and Spokane. So we'll be working on that. We're thinking about it already, and I'm sure we'll welcome feedback on how we're doing with that and how the tri-parties are doing. Okay, and then lastly, I wanted to talk about ecology recruitment or nuclear waste program recruitment. Over the past 3 months, we've had about 26 vacancies out of a staff level of about 70. Since January, we've had 8 new hires. I think we have about 11 open job postings right now, and we're thinking we're going to have another 3 shortly. So we're doing a lot with hiring. One of the this is really important because we're looking at transferring our knowledge, our institutional memory to the next generation of ecology workers. I think in the nuclear waste program staff, we have about 7 employees that are already eligible for retirement. That's their past retirement age and could retire at any time, but are still working. And we'll see more people entering that category in the next 5 years. In my observation, that's a pretty big trend at Hanford. I've seen that both in the Department of Energy staff and also in the contractors. A real generational turnover of people that have been working on Hanford topics for a long time and have a good hands-on feeling. And so we're going to have to transfer that knowledge across the generations. And then lastly, to tie recruitment kind of into what I was talking about before with environmental justice, Ecology has recently added diversity, equity, inclusion, and respect to our position descriptions and also to our annual job goals or evaluations. So we've got 5 core competencies associated with that. We've added 2 in immediately. We're going to be training our staff over the next year and add in those other 3 core competencies. So right now, well, we just want to make sure that employees understand what diversity, equity, and inclusion is, and then just make sure they have a commitment to, increasing their growth in that area. And that is all my slides. I'll pause there or stop there and see if there's any questions.
Okay, Ken Niles, you have your hand up.
Yes, thank you. Hi, John. Good to see you again.
Yeah, good to see you.
So on the holistic negotiations, I understand the lack of transparency in a lot of ways. I am wondering if you've had discussions with the Oregon Department of Energy to give them at least some status or progress.
Only in a very general sense, and Max can weigh in that. We've tried to give them a sense of, things are going okay, or, just some general awareness of what's going on. But I'm anticipating we're getting to the point pretty quickly where we can sit down and talk some specifics with them.
Okay. The concern I have, and it's not just about lack of transparency with Oregon, but not doing more both by DOE and ecology, is that, eventually you're going to have 3 years of negotiations or 3+ years, however long it takes. Your lawyers will have, looked at every single letter and every single word. And it seems to me the likelihood of public comments at that point influencing a change is pretty remote because of all that has gone into whatever it is you're doing. So how do you get around that?
Yeah, and I think that's a very legitimate concern. The root cause of the problem is it really complicates negotiations if you're giving kind of ongoing updates as you go through negotiations, because there can be a big swing in the parties' negotiating positions, and if you have to communicate those swings and take feedback on that, it just adds a whole nother demand on your time. And I can tell you, having worked on these negotiations for 3 years, it's been a big time impact to us. So that's kind of the root cause of the problem. I guess I would say 2 things as far as, is the public going to have meaningful participation? One thing I always say is the public's position before negotiations really influence us. I know I typically find myself in negotiations thinking about certain things that we have to have coming out of the negotiations in order to have a credible proposal for the public. I mean, we're pretty clear on some things the public is going to want. Probably not everything, but there's some things that we understand, people are interested in, and so we fold those into our negotiating positions. So that's point 1. Point 2 is, I think, unlike the 2010 tank waste settlement negotiations, which you remember, we came out of that with a signed, consent decree, which we couldn't change, and then TPA milestones, which we could take public comment. I think it'll be different this time because any changes to the consent decree can receive public comment, because the way modifications to the consent decree work, both parties, if they're in agreement, take those jointly to the court. So I think it'll be a little bit broader scope of public involvement this time. So I'm hoping that helps. But I acknowledge it's a really difficult situation for people that are interested and want to provide some input.
Okay, thanks for your answer.
Max, I believe you were next.
Yeah, thanks. And thanks, John. And to Ken, to your point, yes, John and I, and John's, I guess it's your boss, David Bowen, the director of the nuclear waste program, talk on a monthly basis, but at a scheduled time, but more frequently, typically, about range of topics, but this, of course, included. John, my specific question for you was, I was curious to know more about the specifics of what environmental justice means for your program and for ecology's role at the Hanford site. And Oregon state government shares the same goals and commitments. And it's important, I think, for all of us to consider it's not just words in a law or a statute or directive or a PowerPoint slide, but the practice. I'm curious to know if you've taken steps at your program to implement that at the Hanford site. And if not, maybe what are some ideas that we can expect to see coming in the forthcoming period of time?
Sure. So I can tell you that generally we focus more on the tribal impacts. From my perspective, there's potentially, two groups that are heavily impacted by Hanford. One is the tribal governments that have, treaty rights at Hanford. So, typically, how I think of it is the faster Hanford gets cleaned up and the better it cleans up, the sooner they can use all of their treaty rights or more of their treaty rights. The other population I think about is across the river from Hanford to the east is an area where there's perhaps more Hispanic individuals and more individuals that maybe speak English as a second language. So we're aware of that and we think about that. We've been talking with the Department of Energy recently as we transition to a digital administrative record instead of a paper administrative record. And we've asked the Department of Energy to do a couple things. One is design an outreach program to individuals across the Columbia River to the east, and also to do things like putting up notices in the library in both English and Spanish. So we're anticipating having posters in the libraries explaining how to access the Hanford Administrative Record, and we think those posters should be in Spanish as well as English. So those are a couple practical things we do. We also talk to the Yakama Nation monthly, not as frequently